Speaking of Joe Manchin, I want to just go through some of the highlights of this article. I know I mentioned it yesterday. This is really important for people to understand.
Good on the New York Times for doing this, even though, again, as you said yesterday, the political reporters will pretend it never happened.
Exactly. It'll still be Joe Manchin's concerned about the deficit. Joe Manchin's concerned about inflation. Joe Manchin doesn't want to see a lot of money spent on, electric charging stations or anything. This is
because it's for the good of the country in his eyes. We may have a disagreement, Sam.
And back in the day, libertarians would say, we need to decentralize because there's too much corruption. There's too much corruption in the federal government, and we need to have smaller. We need to put more hands in the states. This is a perfect example of how much more corrupt governments are, the more local you get them. Because the people who run, not all of them, I don't know about the majority even, Gustavo Rivera, state senator from Bronx, who was on the live show we did, really broke it down into sort of like, there are sort of like types of people who are in the Senate. One cohort of people in the Senate, state Senate, could be assembly, whatever it is. One cohort of people in local politics see politics as simply an extension of their business interests. Period. End of story. They don't perceive it as that being corrupt or whatnot. It is just like
all they know.
Why do I join the United Way? Why do I sit on the board of the United Way? Because I want to network so that I can meet other people and also feel like I'm doing good, whatever it is. Good. Good on you for doing something like that. Why do I become state senator? I become state senator because it's going to allow me to run my business. In Joe Manchin's case, it's going to allow him to found essentially a business. Joe Manchin became a state senator in 1987. It was a part-time job with a base pay of $6,500. His family's carpet business.
Well, yeah, and they do that just to say, so like you need an outside source of revenue in order to serve in these positions.
I would love to see, there's no email back then, but I would imagine if that was in present day, the amount of like work emails that he would send were over under set at 10 and a half.
His family's carpet business was struggling. And at that time, there was a business, Grant Town Power Plant, that was just looking to be built. Some developers wanted to build this in Grant Town. That is a place in West Virginia, just south of Pennsylvania. And Manchin ended up helping these developers build this. He went into business with Grant Town. Manchin made sure that they could get a permit to build their power plant, even though it was close to another power plant, because the local, the state EPA essentially worries that concentration of all the stuff that we burn here could be bad for people. He managed to get them a waiver. And this is just nuts. What ended up happening is right around that time, and I think in part with a loan from the Grant Town Power Plant people, he started a business. He bought a couple of mines and supplied the Grant Town Power Plant with a type of low-grade coal that they call gob, which means like, I don't know, garbage of bituminous. Literally, garbage of bituminous. It's waste coal. And so he provided this gob.
You're basically burning trash or junk from coal to get extra. Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
Junk coal
to get extra electricity.
Exactly. And his business has been or I should say, Granttown Power Plant has been the sole customer for his business for 20 years. The sole customer.
And what's that office like?
He urged the state official to approve its air pollution permit. That's the first thing. He pushed fellow lawmakers to support a tax credit that helped the plant. Worked behind the scenes to facilitate a rate increase that drove up revenue for the plant, because when they started, all of their projections of what it was going to cost to produce this energy were lower than it ultimately became, because they bought garbage of bituminous instead of the higher grade coal. So it was more expensive to generate energy. So not only is Manchin making all of his millions of dollars by selling this garbage coal to this power plant, helping them overcome all of the hurdles that would have killed a different plant, it's actually costing the ratepayers, his constituents, more money to subsidize the use of his garbage that they're burning.
Even though it's cheaper for Granttown.
Or it's not necessarily cheaper for Granttown. No,
Oh.
That's the thing. It cost them more money to turn that into power.
Okay.
Because it's such garbage, but they can pass that along once
Right.
they get approval from the West Virginia government to their ratepayers.
Okay, gotcha.
They don't have to justify, why are we burning bog? We don't have to justify that. Well, we're burning bog because that's what Joe Manchin was supplying us. And Joe Manchin's the guy who's making it possible for us to set up the plant in the first place.
Burning gob.
Records show that several energy companies have held ownership stakes in the power plant, among them major corporations with interests far beyond West Virginia. At various points, those corporations have sought to influence the Senate, the U.S. Senate, including legislation before committees on which Joe Manchin sat, creating what ethics experts describe as a conflict of interest.
No.
Yep. So, as the Grant Power Plant continues to burn coal and pay dividends to Mr. Manchin, it has harmed West Virginians economically, costing them hundreds of millions of dollars in excess electricity fees, because GOB is less efficient power source than regular coal. This is just the multiple ways that Joe Manchin is literally screwing his constituents is mind-boggling. This account from the New York Times, based on thousands of pages of documents from lawsuits, land records, state regulatory hearings, lobbying, and financial disclosures, federal energy data, and other records spanning more than 3 decades. The documents and interviews show that at every level of Mr. Manchin's political career, from state lawmaker to U.S. senator, his official actions have benefited his financial interest into the Granttown plant, blurring the line between public business and private gain. They own, he and his wife, assets between $4.5 and $12.8 million as of 2020. That's according to Senate financial disclosure. That's a pretty wide gulf there. That's a bigger gap than my 2 kids. Enter Systems is now run by Joe Manchin's son. In 2020, it paid Mr. Manchin almost $500,000, according to his filings, almost 3 times his salary as a United States Senator. From 2010 to 2020, Manchin reported a total of $5.6 million from the company.
And I just wanted to look up before we move past that part, the gob coal or whatever, has 4 times more mercury than regular coal. Just so people understand, what Manchin was doing here.
That and the permit that they got was probably didn't even take that into consideration. So what happened was in 1978, you had all the energy crisis. The Congress made it easier to open up plants that were going to burn standard coal, 4 times the mercury. The developers who planned the Granttown plant created a company called American Bituminous Power Partners, or AMBIT. It signed a contract with a local utility, Mongolia Power, to purchase the electricity it produced from Gob. So Manchin is a state senator. After helping win the permit for the plant, Manchin began to profit from it. On October 5th, 1989, one of Manchin's companies, Transcon, bought an old coal mine in Barackville, 5 miles south of Granttown, for $380,000. It's unclear where he got that money. That same day, maybe he didn't even need the money, because that same day he sold the property and its gob piles to Ambit for $500,000. You follow this?
Yeah.
If I go buy a piece of property, I say, here's the check. Before you have a chance to cash this check, I get another check for 380 grand. Here's my check. I get another 500 grand that comes into my bank account. I got that 380 covered, and I just made 120 grand. But not only did he sell that to Granttown, he also got a share of the revenue generated from it. He signed another deal with Ambit that Manchin, involving another old coal mine that Manchin owned. He leased that mine along with the gob on that property to Ambit. In return, Ambit agreed to pay not just rent to Manchin, but also 1% of the gross revenue from electricity generated by burning gob from Manchin's old coal mine that he sold. That's the way you launder these deals. But you do two deals.
Yeah.
You have the terms from the second deal tied into the first deal, so the first deal doesn't look as bad. Once the Granttown plant opened, Mr. Manchin urged his fellow state lawmakers to back a tax credit for the power plants that burn gob, because they're not getting as much out of that gob as the regular coal would be. Only 3 plants in the entire state burn gob. Granttown was one of them. As the Granttown plant continued to buy Manchin's gob, Manchin's political ambitions grew. He was elected Secretary of State. In 2000, 4 years later, he rode a landslide into the governor's mansion. From that position, he helped the power plant win an even more coveted prize. Shortly after the Granttown plant began burning gob, Ambit said the operating costs were higher than expected and the company was going to need more money for the electricity it was supplying to Manchin's constituents. Mm-hmm. So the gob he's selling to the plant was inefficient to burn for electricity. So it was going to cost the power plant more. So they needed to maintain their profits. So they needed to get their constituents to pay more money. The West Virginia Public Service Commission said, we're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
Probably because the utility company, Mon Power, was like, we're not going to pass on this, cost to our constituents. Well, in 2006, Manchin becomes governor. Ambit seeks the rate increase again. And Governor Manchin, who is literally making royalties on that money, agrees to it and pushes it through. This is like the idea that after this was published, the Department of Justice is not knocking on doors in West Virginia, that the FBI is not going in and raiding places.
Well, I mean, maybe it stopped. And then when he was elected to the U.S. Senate, then he was stopping, I don't know, being one of the, quote, most vocal opponents to the EPA's proposed limits on emissions of mercury and other hazardous substances from power plants. The mercury regulations, which eventually took effect, were partially threatening to plants like Granttown because gob generates more mercury per kilowatt of electricity than when burned than traditional coal. So he took that pro-mercury emission fight to the federal government as well.
This guy, and we're not even talking about all the corruption that was involved with his family and putting his daughter at the West Virginia state university, and
yeah, like making the university act like she had a qualification she didn't have, so she could continue being a CEO of a pharma company that he helped land her at.
this is really just it's just amazing.
And to the extent, like, when you have these small government libertarian types that genuinely believe that smaller is less corrupt, but when you have people with foundation or political connections say this stuff, it's pretty much just to protect guys like Joe Manchin.
Yep. You can buy them cheap. A
lot cheaper, a lot less eyes on it.
Yep. And this guy's gotten away for it for decades. And here's the horror story of all of this. Joe Manchin had decided to retire. Republican would be representing West Virginia. And all the federal judiciary would be basically frozen. We would not have a seat on the Supreme Court. I mean, this is how effed up things are. And
it's a no-win situation.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is, you look for the Democrats to do a pickup or two in the Senate. I don't think it's going to happen.
Jeez.
But still like to see this guy go to jail. Like tomorrow.
Yeah. And it's just like also in terms of the way that the very thinly veiled way that you hide these business connections, like, he's disclosed these connections on his to the Senate in this official capacity. It's those disclosures are designed to be as like thin and as easily worked around as possible for guys like Joe Manchin. And that's why he's still in power.
Yep. Really stunning. And of course, you're the governor of the state. Who's going to come after you?
Yeah.
Who's there to come after you?